All right, welcome to this week's edition of Professional Insights, brought to you by the National Referral Network and hosted by two rakishly handsome guys. Rakishly, that's a word they use in old movies, I think. I think I
Never
saw
heard
that.
that word, Mike.
I'm just picking new words out of the air here. Two guys named Mike. I'm Mike. He's Mike. What's going on, sir?
Good morning, Mike. I'm excited about this conversation. So I'm
Yeah,
excited to be here.
Me too, because the purpose of these presentations is to share professional wisdom and insights, and you guessed it, all kinds of other stuff that professionals and individuals and really anybody can make use of however they will. Today, it's just the two of us because we're going to talk about this whole issue of rolling over a retirement plan, your old 401k, your old 403b, your old whatever. Should you do it? Should you do it? Should you not do it? We'll go through the pros and cons here. So, Mike, where should we start?
So, Mike, I think you and I spoke a little bit before this, and I think it was interesting with a lot of the market shifts that are happening and the layoffs. I found it interesting, and the stat that I found this morning at the end of 2021, there was $1.35 trillion that was left in previous employers' retirement accounts.
Wow.
And so I think this is the importance of why we're having this conversation, Mike, is because there's a lot of people that don't know what to do. And so really quick, we'll kind of start with the options, and then we'll dig into the pros and cons of both.
Yeah.
And so there are 4 options to rolling over a qualified account. Obviously, the first one is you can cash out, right? Now, obviously, there's tax complications, and you need to consult a CPA before you do that.
Right.
You could leave it with your previous employer in the tune of $1.35 trillion. You can roll the funds over to your new employer, whoever that may be. Or, and I think this is where your expertise really comes in alignment to the conversation, Mike, is that you have the option to roll it over into an IRA.
Right.
Now, before we dig into this, I do want to let people know that there is no cost to rolling these funds over to whatever option you want to. And Mike, let's start with that.
Well, you mean start with the rollover option?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So a rollover to an IRA really means that you're taking money that's, let me begin at the beginning. So retirement plan money is money that has not yet been taxed. The exception to that being money that's put into a Roth IRA, or now what many people have available to them, a Roth 401k. And this is when you put money in that is after tax. You've already paid taxes on it. And it, essentially grows tax-free. But in the absence of that money, it's been put into a retirement plan that hasn't yet been taxed, can be rolled over into an IRA, and there's no tax consequence whatsoever. To go back to your earlier point, I want to go to, you've got 4 options. You can cash out. That generally means you can pay taxes and penalties. It's a terrible option. It's sort of like the court of last resort. If you absolutely need money, you have no other resource for it, I guess that's what you got to do. Okay. You can leave it at your old employer's plan, which is what, according to the numbers, a lot of people do. And they just sort of do it because they don't know what else to do. You could roll it into a new employer's plan. That's kind of a nifty option. And again, as we spoke about, it could roll out to an IRA. So why don't we talk about the pros and cons of one versus the other? We've already talked about cashing out. Why don't we talk about the others?
Absolutely, Mike. And I think that's a key thing, because on average, there's about 55,000 in an account, right?
About that. Yeah. That's
about that. Give or take. And it's interesting though, Mike, is that, and you and I've talked about this, and we work with clients that have accounts in here and here and here and here, and it's certainly an option.
Mm-hmm.
But given your experience on terms of a financial planning and management standpoint, what are the pros and cons to having multiple accounts in multiple banks, in multiple investment strategies?
Well, candidly, I think the disadvantages outweigh the advantages if you're talking about having multiple accounts in multiple places. But let's kind of start down that road a little bit. What are the pros and cons of leaving money at a current employer or an old employer versus rolling it over? Well, the advantages, as is often written about, are that the investments inside of a 401k tend to be, let's just call them, the cost of those investments tends to be at a wholesale rate. Every single investment anywhere has an expense associated with it. It's a really, really small expense. It's usually uh, maybe as low as 0.1% on up to maybe 0.5% in some cases higher, but it's a very nominal expense. And those expenses tend to be less expensive. They tend to be lower when these investments reside inside of a company-sponsored retirement plan. Okay, um, so it's kind of the difference between paying wholesale and paying retail. So you save a little bit on the expense side, keeping the money at an old employer or even rolling it into a current employer. The disadvantage is that the menu of investments that you would see on a 401k, they tend to be somewhat limited. Some menus are rather large. I mean, they can be a couple hundred investments. So you can say, well, no, if I've got all these investments available to me, how is it limited? Well, there still can be some limitations. Generally speaking, if you roll the money over into an IRA, you can avail yourself of the broader investment universe. You can buy anything and do anything. Now, there's pros and cons to that. It's sort of like, would you give the patient the keys to the pharmaceutical cabinet, I guess. But generally speaking, it's a superior option because you've got a great deal more flexibility, and you can work directly with an advisor, which you really can't do when you're operating on an employer's 401k platform. And most plans do not have or do not give you the option of working directly with an advisor. So there's probably more advantages to rolling it over into just your own personal account. And there's probably an advantage to consolidating all these maybe smaller accounts you may have had over the years that have accumulated here and here. And we hear this a lot. I've got an old IRA over at Wells Fargo or that I never did anything with or what have you. Bringing all that stuff together and creating order makes our job easier, especially from a financial planning standpoint. So there are probably more advantages and disadvantages.
So, Mike, when you look at when we look at 401ks, right? Every 401k for the most part is created equal. There's the same 10,000 funds that you have available to you.
Yeah.
Now, to your point, not all 401k plans have all of them. So, talk to us about looking at a 401k and maybe it's with Fidelity, and all of the options are Fidelity target date funds.
Sure.
But the new employer has a more wide array of options. So how does a client determine if they were going to roll from a previous employer to a new employer? How do they even determine what is a better mix of options?
Well, first of all, let's explain what a target date fund actually is. I mean, let's assume that, it's sort of like going into a restaurant and it's a cuisine you're unfamiliar with, and you're seeing all these dishes you don't understand. And then you look at and you see something that's kind of the chef's price fix menu or whatever. You say, okay, give me the number 5. Target date funds are managed based upon a predetermined date. So they're literally kind of asking you, well, just we're not at, they're saying you don't need to pick the investments. Just identify when you want to retire and then just pick an investment that's managed based upon that predetermined retirement date. Like, say, I don't know, target 2050, let's say, okay, which is, a little less than 20 years from now. If that's when you want to retire and you choose that fund is basically managed to fit that retirement date. It changes its allocation. It changes its investment mixtures based upon you getting closer and closer to that date. So it's the turnkey option, and these are really, really popular because they're used in the absence of knowing what else to do. And most people, when they look at these menus of investments, they're looking at something that they essentially don't thoroughly understand. So it's a safer option.
So what is when we talk about pros and cons? Obviously, there's pros and cons to target date funds. There's pros and cons to having a wider array of options in another 401k plan.
Mm-hmm.
How does somebody evaluate those two options?
Well, the differences are usually, if you're talking about an old employer's plan versus a new employer's plan, chances are the differences are really, really minor. I mean,
Yep.
to be almost to the point where they don't really make that much difference. Again, I think that over the course of my career, I think the more superior option is to simply take these old balances and roll them out into an IRA. You get more flexibility. Yeah, it might be from an investment standpoint a little bit more expensive, but when we say a little bit more expensive, it might be 0.1% more expensive. I mean, it's just not really even a thing. At least I don't think that's a very, very small expense differential, particularly if you're looking at a balance of 50 or 100,000. It's almost nothing. And you control everything. You can invest in whatever you want. You can work with an advisor if you want. So, in spite of that, I've always regarded that as a superior option. I just don't think the difference in 401k platforms, one company to the next, they're not especially significant anymore.
Now, I don't mean to pick on 401k plans, Mike, because we certainly have clients that we work with on 401ks, and there is a use for them. However, the data suggests otherwise, right? The data suggests that 401, I mean, look, we're on our second or third generation of 401k users.
Yeah.
So the market really hasn't determined if they work or not. And so it's a lot. There are a lot of questions on how to do that. And I think you've answered a few of them. But in terms of really managing wealth, I mean, I don't mean to be biased, but should a client really leave it in a 401k?
Well, again, I think you want as much in your own control as you can get. I think, and I certainly think everybody needs to take responsibility for figuring out their direction financially in their lives, and that probably means at some point engaging experts that have abilities beyond your own. But I will say this: the most effective savings and accumulation device that I've seen in my 30-year career is payroll deduction. It really just absolutely works, because if you sign up for whatever it is, and now these days in employee benefits, you can through payroll deduction you can buy a wide array of things. Most companies are offering everything from investments to dog food. But it really, I mean, once you've made that adjustment in what shows up in your net pay, most employees don't even think about it anymore. And then they wake up a year, 2 years, 5 years from now and go, oh God, look what I did. I've got X amount of money in my 401k. So it's far and away the most powerful way to accumulate money. That said, the next level version of that is for employees to get better educated about what it all means. What does it mean for their long-term financial health, and most importantly, retirement. I think, the employer-sponsored plans really don't do enough to educate their employees on what it all means at the end of the rainbow. So going back to rolling over to an IRA really is it's as much an act of taking responsibility and taking control over your own destiny as it is anything else.
Oh, being a steward of your money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always a key thing, right? Learning how money works.
Yeah.
And so with that, Mike, I think it's a great segue into some of the things that you've put together as the co-founder of Protection Point Advisors in terms of the education.
Mhm.
And these are some of the topics that you guys, or as a team, we cover in terms of some of these risk management features.
Well, we do. We cover a lot of that stuff. And we also, again, financial planning and financial wellness, if you want to call it that, is not just about what your financial planner does or what your investment person does. It's also about what your trust attorney does. It's about what your accountant does. Everybody needs at some level a team of people working on their behalf. And that's why we built the National Referral Network, so that we have this resource pool of qualified professionals that are doing it right. No more, I don't think individuals anymore can afford to have a bunch of different advisors that don't know each other and don't work together on their behalf. It's sort of like having a football team and not everybody knows the plays. It's a little bit crazy that way, but that's how the world has worked up until now, and we're trying to change that.
No, and I appreciate that, Mike, because I spoke to a client the other day, and we talked about how the wealthy manage their money, and Robert
Mhm.
Kiyosaki and a lot of Warren Buffett just talk about follow the steps of the wealthy, and the wealthy have a team.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
unfortunate part is that a lot of individuals feel that that's too expensive to do that,
Well, and
and it's
yeah,
not.
and I'll say one more thing about that. What the wealthy also do is they know where their expertise ends and someone else's begins. And a very common mistake is, well, I'm just going to do it all. And you read articles in, oh, I don't know, on the internet and on the financial websites or wherever, and they talk about all that you can do yourself. And I think that's a big mistake. Most people money's emotional, and even though you may be smart enough to disseminate a lot of this, and or you may be willing to dedicate the mental energy it requires, but can you divorce yourself from your emotions? Because emotional mistakes are the most costly ones there are. And I guess we're about ready to wrap up here. As we
Yep.
wrap up, that's one thing we emphasize this a lot at our firm. Emotional decisions when it comes to money are almost always going to cost you money. You're going to act against yourself.
Yep. And I read a article the other day that the loss, because of the emotional side of it, the cost of having an advisor and having a team actually prevents that loss. So you end up gaining faster
Right.
because you don't take as big of losses.
Right. I think, and that's where any good advisor is going to pay for yourself. Look, hiring an advisor means you're buying peace of mind. And if you're not, by the way, if you're not experiencing peace of mind, you should fire that advisor. Okay. Because you didn't get what you paid for. Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause it's really their job to almost, corral you and say, okay, come on. It's sort of like, in some ways, I don't want to say it's like going to the dentist, because nobody likes going to the dentist. I like to believe people like seeing me more than their dentist, but
Hope so.
um, but it is a little bit like going to one's physician every now and then to stay healthy. I mean, we all do it because we've been educated in that direction, and we should just do it with our money. Take your money to the doctor every so often to just see how healthy you are. And if you're not as healthy as you want to be, they can talk to you about whatever adjustments you need to make.
No, I think that's a great point, Mike. And it's a great point to kind of end on. I tried to look up, there are a couple websites out there, you guys, that you can put in your information and they'll pull up where you have left money. I tried to find that resource. I'll try to do my best to try to post that later on. But you could just do a simple Google search, 401k left behind money or something, and you'll find
All right.
something.
Yeah,
Um,
we're happy to help. I mean, the other thing I will mention is we're pretty good at if you're rolling over an old 401k, there's a process to it, and there's no two processes are like. Companies can invent their own protocols with regard to money leaving, and it's a precarious landscape sometimes. So, in other words, if you're going to do it, you got to make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed to the letter. And we're pretty good at that, and we can help.
yeah. So let us know how we can help. Thank you, Mike. I know we typically have a guest, but you and I thought that this was a pretty important topic. So I appreciate you participating.
Well, there's a lot of money floating out there. There are a lot of, we talked about layoffs. We talked about all these Twitter employees now who are wondering what to do with their 401ks. Anybody, by the way, if they're watching this, hello, happy to help.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, call me. Just
Yeah.
but we are here every Tuesday with guests. The idea, like Mike said, is to create some value, educate, and then allow people to be a better steward of their money. We talked
Yep.
about.
That's the whole idea.
So, any final thoughts, Mike, before we wrap this up?
No, again, if you anybody who has any questions, just reach out to us. We're happy to answer questions. And no, nobody's going to try to sell you something. We're just going to answer your question.
Absolutely. So, with that, we'll be here next Tuesday. You guys have a great week. See you soon.
Okay, guys. Thanks, guys.